Welcome to VidZet, your home for careful consideration of our common concerns. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. Please share this video with others if you find it worthy. We need all the help we can get in the war of ideas. I made a small comment on Twitter about guns and my feed exploded. It was so big that a daily task that normally takes less than an hour took me 3 hours. This subject will almost certainly take several posts to get everything covered, so hang in there. Now, in the interests of full disclosure, I've been a life member of the NRA for over 30 years. I'm also a doctor. Remember, I don't play one on TV. I'm a real doctor. And I've taken care of people with horrible gunshot wounds. Something that gives me a measure of understanding of what guns are and what the results of their use can be. In the Twitter discussion, one train of thought came to the front. No surprise, it was the nature and scope of the Second Amendment. Just to refresh everyone, the key clause in that amendment is, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, there are two parts to the clause. The first is the people. In the District of Columbia versus Heller Supreme Court case, the court stated very clearly that the people are the citizens of the United States as individuals. Don't ever give a lefty an inch on this. The right belongs to every individual citizen. I won't rehash all the arguments that led to this conclusion, but it's consistent with all other Supreme Court decisions regarding constitutional rights. That means it's very unlikely that the Supreme Court will ever reverse Heller. Second, keeping and bearing arms refers to the ability of an individual to have a functional firearm at ready while at home and away from home. Not all of the boundaries of that finding have been established, but one part of it is very clear. The decision declares that citizens are allowed to have weapons that are used in common use for lawful purposes or in common use at the time. Let me translate this. Common means ordinary. So with 15 million AR-15s in civilian hands, AR-15s are in common use. In fact, it may well be the most common single firearm in American hands. So, by law, according to the Supreme Court, an AR-15 is a protected weapon. Don't let any lefty try to claim that AR-15s aren't protected under the Second Amendment. If they make that claim, they just don't know what they're talking about. And you need to make that very clear to them. Most AR-15s, mine included, are primarily used for paper punching, target shooting for those of you in Rio Linda, with a possibility of using them for defense if needed. I'd bet that most AR-15 owners also have a pistol that is their preferred defensive weapon. Notice I said preferred, not exclusive. The Florida State Legislature happened to be in session when Nicholas Cruz shot up Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. This created a wonderful opportunity for politicians to look like they were doing something, so they jumped right in, and they did 4 major things. A couple were actually good, and our governor signed the bill. The good things they did were to fund greater numbers of security people in school. They even allowed certain staff members to carry weapons. This part wasn't perfect, but it was a major step in the right direction. They also provided money for mental health assistance in schools. Then they took a hard left turn. The legislature declared a 3-day waiting period for all gun purchases. For me, that's a minor inconvenience, since I would simply be adding to the number of guns I own. But for a battered woman in need of protection from an abusive man, that's a different story.
The reasons that I have a firearm is to protect my family, is to protect my kids. I mean, honestly, you know, guys, let's be real. In my mind, I'm like 7 foot tall, 400 pounds, right? But in reality, I'm 5'6" and I weigh $125. I'm going to be easily overpowered.
Carol Bown of Berlin Township, New Jersey, was stabbed to death by her violent ex-husband while she waited to buy a gun for defense against him. She is not alone. Proponents of a waiting period claim it will reduce crimes of passion and save lives. They quote a study by Malhotra that calculates waiting periods would save about 1,000 lives per year. Their key data points come from the Brady Law and its mandatory waiting periods that began in 1994. I won't bore you with all the details, but after reading the study, a couple of things are very clear. Malhotra did not take into account the fact that gunshot deaths were already in a steady decline across the board before the Brady Law was passed. The rate of decline did not change with the Brady Law. That alone should tell you the waiting periods did nothing. Next, Malhotra says nothing about what happened to states that dropped their waiting periods after the Brady waiting periods expired. But he claims that waiting periods would result in an 18% reduction in murders. Welcome to, if you have no data, make it up. Let's have a look. Illinois is a great example. In order to buy a gun there, you have to get a firearm owner identification card. In other words, you have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops. Then you have another 3 days to wait to pick up your handgun. By definition, you are a law-abiding citizen. But Chicago plants about 2 citizens every day due to gunshot murder, and almost every one of those is with a stolen gun. After all, criminals don't obey the law.
Surprise, surprise, surprise!
Malhotra tells us that Illinois would have another 169 murders a year without the waiting period. Really? None of those murderers bought their guns at a gun store. None of them waited 3 days to pick up their guns, and almost no one who did go through those hoops killed anyone. Put bluntly, like a lot of gun hooey, Malhotra's study is blatant nonsense. Murder was declining before the Brady waiting period. It's still declining after it. Waiting periods don't do squat to reduce crime. Criminals don't obey the law. But I repeat myself. Constitutionally, the waiting period is suspect. Remember that it is a prior restraint on a constitutional right. Prior restraints are illegal by definition. But lefties are celebrating the fact that the Supreme Court recently refused to hear a case on California's 10-day waiting period. Some headlines declare that it upheld the waiting period. Once again, the left doesn't understand what it's saying. The Supreme Court denied cert. This is a legal term that simply says the court isn't taking the case. When that happens, the lower court ruling stands. It doesn't mean anything about what the Supreme Court thinks. Rather, because the court can only take about 3% of the cases appealed to it, it tends to select cases of special legal concern like the Trump immigration order, or it takes cases when the appeals courts have ruled in opposite directions. The waiting period case just didn't make the cut this time. The worst part of the Florida law is a restriction on buying a gun until age 21. The NRA has already sued to overturn this provision. In short, 18-year-olds are legal adults. This became clear constitutional law with the 26th Amendment in 1971. The basic argument was that since 18-year-olds were old enough to volunteer to serve in the military, handle deadly weapons of war, and die, they were old enough to vote. They were full citizens. The amendment passed overwhelmingly in a very short time. Florida's restriction declares that an adult of 18, but not yet 21, is somehow restricted from exercising his constitutional rights. We might argue that 18-year-olds aren't very responsible, and car insurance companies would agree. Boys don't get mature adult rates until about 25, typically 3 or 4 years after girls. But that's not a matter of law. The law declares 18-year-olds to be full adults with full privileges and duties. No state can remove that status legally. That means 18-year-olds are part of the people who have the right to keep and bear arms. Before you get wound up about 21 being the drinking age, the feds got around the Constitution by tying that to funding. Basically, federal highway funds were going to be cut off from any state that didn't move the drinking age to 21. It's still suspect legally, but I don't know of any legal action to change it. Let's say this a bit differently. We trust 18-year-olds with fully automatic 50 caliber machine guns that can blast through block walls. We let them use artillery pieces that can destroy whole buildings. Why are they not mature enough to use a 22 caliber centerfire rifle that only fires one shot with each trigger pull? Am I missing something? Or is the legislature completely irrational? Let's throw one more log on this fire. In Florida, you can enter the police academy at 19. Some states allow you in at 18. The last time I checked, police academy recruits will be expected to become sworn officers who carry guns to uphold the law. So where are we? In short, we are watching the typical political response to a crisis. As Rahm Emanuel famously said, never let a crisis go to waste. Translated, that means that no politician will let a crisis slide by without somehow legislating a solution. It doesn't matter whether that solution will actually help anything. It may make things worse. The Florida solution, and I suspect many more, includes stupid and even harmful parts in that waiting period and 21-year age restriction on guns. I strongly expect the NRA suit to prevail and overturn the 21-year age restriction. We'll have to wait for a waiting period suit. Hardening schools is an excellent idea. The mental health issues will have to prove their value. Unfortunately, without a court order, no psychiatrist is able to report nut jobs to anyone. HIPAA, the medical privacy law, makes that a crime. As Gideon J. Tucker said, no man's life, liberty, or property is safe while the legislature is in session. Until next time, I'm Dr. Ted Noel. Please like VidZ on Facebook, support VidZ on Patreon, and follow @VidZ on Twitter. Thanks for watching.